The positive pregnancy test trembled in Nadia Thompson's dark brown hands as she stood frozen in her bathroom, staring at the 2 pink lines that should have brought pure joy. Instead, her heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and dread that she couldn't quite explain. Through the thin walls of their small Atlanta apartment, she could hear Terrence's voice on the phone in the next room, but something about his hushed, tender tone made her stomach twist into knots. "I can't wait to hold our little one," he whispered into the phone, and Nadia's breath caught. Our little one. Those words should have been for her, about their baby, the one she just discovered was growing inside her. But there was something secretive about the way he said it, something that made her press her ear closer to the door. "Camille, baby, you know I love you," Terrence continued, his voice so soft and loving that it felt like a knife twisting in Nadia's chest. "When you have this baby, everything's gonna change. We can finally be together for real." The pregnancy test clattered to the bathroom floor as Nadia's legs gave out beneath her. She sank onto the cold tiles, her mind reeling. Camille. Her baby sister Camille. The sister she'd helped raise after their daddy died when Camille was just 12. The sister she'd put through community college. The sister she'd trusted with everything, including apparently her husband. "The baby's due in 2 weeks, Terrence's voice drifted through the door, each word hitting Nadia like a physical blow. "I already got the nursery ready at the house on Pine Street." Nadia don't know nothing about it. Nadia's hand instinctively moved to her still flat stomach. 2 weeks. Camille was having Terrence's baby in 2 weeks, and here she sat, holding her own positive pregnancy test, feeling like her entire world was crashing down around her. The irony was so cruel it almost made her laugh, but instead, tears began streaming down her face. She thought about all the times in the past few months when Terrence had been working late, all the times Camille had been too busy to hang out, all the family dinners where they barely looked at each other. How could she have been so blind? How could the 2 people she loved most in this world have betrayed her so completely? "Yeah, I got the job lined up in Birmingham," Terrence continued. "Soon as the baby comes we can move there, start fresh. Nadia's been talking about having kids anyway, so she'll get over it eventually." Get over it? Like she was just some obstacle in their path to happiness. Like their 5-year marriage meant nothing. Like her love, her trust, her devotion was something they could just toss aside for their own selfish desires. Nadia pressed her face into her hands, trying to muffle the sobs that threatened to escape. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. She'd been trying to get pregnant for 2 years, praying every month, hoping and dreaming about the day she could surprise Terrence with the news that they were finally going to be parents. She'd even bought a little gift box and a tiny pair of baby shoes to surprise him with. The gift box sat on the bathroom counter, mocking her now with its cheerful yellow ribbon. Inside was the pregnancy test, a note that said, "Daddy's little blessing coming soon," and those tiny white baby shoes she'd picked out so carefully. She'd planned to give it to him tonight over dinner, maybe light some candles, make his favorite meal. Instead, she was sitting on the bathroom floor, listening to her husband plan his future with her sister and their baby. "I gotta go, baby," Terrence said, his voice getting closer to the bathroom door. "Nadia's in the shower, but I think she's about to come out. I love you, Camille. Kiss that belly for me. Kiss that belly." Nadia wanted to scream. She wanted to burst through the door and confront them both right now, demand answers, fight for her marriage, her family, her life. But her body felt frozen, her mind struggling to process the magnitude of their betrayal. The doorknob turned and Terrence stepped into the bathroom. He was still handsome as ever, his dark skin glowing with health, his broad shoulders filling out his work shirt. This was the man she'd fallen in love with at 19, the man she'd married in her grandmother's church, the man she'd dreamed of growing old with. Now looking at him felt like looking at a stranger. "Hey baby," he said, seemingly normal, as if he hadn't just been planning his escape with her sister. "You okay? You look pale." Nadia quickly wiped her face and reached for the gift box, shoving it behind her back. She couldn't do this now. Not like this. Not when her heart was breaking into a million pieces and her sister was carrying his child. "I'm fine," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just tired from work." Terrence nodded and began brushing his teeth, humming a little tune that used to make her smile. Now it sounded like a funeral dirge. Nadia clutched the pregnancy test behind her back, the plastic edges digging into her palm. She had to get out of here. She had to think. She had to figure out what to do with this impossible situation. As Terrence finished in the bathroom, Nadia slipped past him and into their bedroom. She grabbed her purse and keys, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold them. "Where you going?" Terrence called from the bathroom. "Store," she called back, amazed at how normal her voice sounded. "We need milk." It was a lie. They had plenty of milk. But she needed to get out, needed to drive, needed to breathe air that wasn't thick with betrayal and broken dreams. As she sat in her car in the parking lot of the grocery store 20 minutes later, Nadia finally allowed herself to really cry. Great, heaving sobs that came from somewhere so deep inside her that she felt like she might break in half. Her phone buzzed with a text from Camille. "Can't wait to see you Sunday for dinner at Mama's. Got some news to share." News to share. Nadia almost laughed through her tears. Well, she had news too. She was pregnant with her cheating husband's baby while her sister was about to give birth to his other child. What a family dinner that was going to be. She looked down at the pregnancy test still clutched in her hand. Despite everything, despite the pain and betrayal, she felt a tiny flutter of love for the life growing inside her. This baby was innocent in all of this. This baby was still a miracle, even if the circumstances were a nightmare. But what kind of life could she give a child now? How could she stay married to Terrence knowing what she knew? How could she face Camille? How could she tell her mama, her grandmother, her church family that her perfect marriage was a lie? The questions swirled in her mind as the sun began to set over Atlanta. Tomorrow she would have to make decisions that would change everything. Tonight she would somehow have to go home and pretend that her world hadn't just collapsed. And somehow she would have to find the strength to protect the tiny life growing inside her while figuring out how to rebuild everything else. Nadia barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard Terrence's voice whispering sweet words to Camille, saw him setting up a nursery for another woman's baby. When morning came, she felt like she'd been hit by a truck. Terrence had already left for work, probably grateful to avoid any real conversation. She called in sick to her teaching job at Roosevelt Elementary, something she'd never done unless she was truly ill. But how could she stand in front of 33rd graders and teach them about honesty and kindness when her own life was falling apart? How could she smile and be patient when her heart was shattered? Instead, she drove to the one place that always brought her peace, her grandmother's house in Sweet Auburn. Grandmother Essie had lived in the same small brick house for 50 years, watching the neighborhood change around her but staying rooted like the old oak tree in her front yard. "Child, what's wrong?" Grandmother Essie asked the moment she opened the door. At 75, she was still sharp as a tack, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that seemed to see right through to a person's soul. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Nadia collapsed into her grandmother's arms, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender and vanilla that always clung to her clothes. For a moment, she felt like a little girl again, when Grandmother Essie could fix anything with sweet tea and a warm hug. "I don't know what to do, Grandmama," Nadia whispered, using the childhood name she hadn't said in years. They sat on the floral couch that had been in the living room since Nadia was born, surrounded by family photos that showed happier times. There was her wedding photo with Terrence, both of them beaming with joy. There was Camille's high school graduation, Nadia's arm around her sister's shoulders, both of them proud and hopeful for the future. "Tell me what's troubling your heart," Grandmother Essie said, pouring sweet tea from the pitcher she always kept ready. So Nadia told her everything. About the pregnancy test, about overhearing Terrence's phone call, about Camille's betrayal, about the baby that would be born in 2 weeks. With each word, she felt a little bit of the weight lift from her chest, though the pain remained as sharp as ever. Grandmother Essie listened without interruption, her weathered hands folded in her lap, her face growing more serious with each revelation. When Nadia finished, they sat in silence for a long moment, the old grandfather clock ticking in the corner. "That child ain't even here yet and already causing heartbreak," Grandmother Essie finally said, shaking her head. "But babies don't choose their circumstances, baby girl. That little one's gonna need love just like any other child. How can you think about loving that baby when it represents everything that's been taken from me?" Nadia asked, her voice breaking. "Because that baby's your blood too," Grandmother Essie said firmly. "Camille's your sister, which makes that child your niece or nephew. Ain't the baby's fault their parents made bad choices." Nadia hadn't thought about it that way. In her pain, she'd only seen the baby as a symbol of betrayal, not as an innocent family member who would need love and guidance. "What about my baby?" Nadia whispered, her hand moving to her stomach. "What about Terrence? What about Camille? How do I forgive something like this?" "One step at a time," Grandmother Essie said, taking Nadia's hands in her own. "First, you gotta decide what's best for you and that little one you're carrying. Everything else can wait." They spent the morning talking, crying, and slowly beginning to make sense of the impossible situation. Grandmother Essie shared stories of her own heartbreaks, of times when life had seemed too hard to bear, of how faith and family had carried her through. "Your grandfather cheated on me once," she revealed, shocking Nadia. Thought my world was ending. But you know what I learned? Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can also be the thing that sets you free. Around noon, Nadia's phone buzzed with a call from her mother, Ruth. She'd been dreading this conversation, but she knew she couldn't avoid it forever. Nadia, honey, Camille just called me, her mother said, excitement clear in her voice. She's in labor. The baby's coming early. We're all heading to Grady Hospital. Nadia's stomach dropped. This was it. The moment of truth was arriving faster than she'd expected. Mama, I can't, she started to say. What you mean you can't? This is your sister having her first baby. Family comes first, you know that. Where are you anyway? Terrence is looking for you. Of course he was. Probably panicking that his lies were about to be exposed. I'm at Grandmama's, Nadia said quietly. Well, get yourself to that hospital. Your sister needs you. After her mother hung up, Nadia sat staring at her phone. Grandmother Essie watched her carefully. You don't have to go if you're not ready, she said gently. But what if I am ready? Nadia said slowly. What if seeing that baby, seeing Camille, seeing all of it helps me figure out what I need to do? Then we go together, Grandmother Essie said, reaching for her purse. I've been waiting to meet my great-grandbaby anyway. The drive to Grady Hospital felt like the longest 20 minutes of Nadia's life. Her palms were sweaty on the steering wheel, her heart pounding so hard she was sure Grandmother Essie could hear it. What would she say to Camille? How would she face Terrence? How would she hold that baby knowing it represented the end of her marriage? But as they walked through the hospital doors, Nadia felt something unexpected, curiosity. Despite everything, a part of her wanted to see this child that had already changed so many lives. A part of her wanted to look into Camille's eyes and try to understand how they'd gotten to this point. The maternity ward was bustling with activity, families celebrating new arrivals, flowers and balloons everywhere. Nadia spotted her mother pacing in the waiting room, her church dress wrinkled from worry. There you are, Ruth said, pulling Nadia into a tight hug. Camille's been asking for you. She's scared, baby. This is her first time. Scared. Despite everything, Nadia felt a pang of sympathy for her sister. She remembered how frightened she'd been when she thought she was pregnant once before, how much she'd wanted her sister's support. Where's Terrence? Nadia asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. He went to get coffee, Ruth said. Poor man's been here all morning, pacing like an expectant father himself. So sweet how he cares about Camille. Nadia and Grandmother Essie exchanged a look. If only her mother knew the truth. Can I see her? Nadia asked. Room 314. She'll be so happy to see you. As Nadia walked down the hospital hallway, each step felt heavier than the last. At the door to room 314 she paused, her hand on the handle. Once she opened this door there would be no going back. Once she saw Camille, once she looked into her sister's eyes, she would have to decide what kind of person she wanted to be. She thought about the baby growing inside her own body, about the kind of mother she wanted to be, about the kind of example she wanted to set. She thought about Grandmother Essie's words about family and forgiveness, about sometimes the worst thing setting you free. Taking a deep breath, Nadia opened the door. Camille lay in the hospital bed, her dark skin glistening with sweat, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked younger than her 25 years, vulnerable and frightened. When she saw Nadia, her eyes filled with tears. Sister, you came, she whispered. And despite everything, despite the betrayal and the lies and the broken trust, Nadia felt her heart crack open just a little bit. Because this was still her baby sister, the girl she'd rocked to sleep after nightmares, the girl she'd taught to ride a bike, the girl she'd loved longer than she'd loved anyone else in the world. Of course I came, Nadia said, moving closer to the bed. How are you feeling? Scared, Camille admitted. Nadia, I need to tell you something. Something important. Nadia's heart began to race. This was it. The confession. The truth. The moment that would determine everything that came next. But before Camille could say another word, a contraction hit, and she gripped Nadia's hand with surprising strength. The baby's coming, she gasped. Oh God, the baby's coming now. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of medical activity, coaching Camille through contractions, and trying to process the surreal situation Nadia found herself in. She was holding her sister's hand while her sister gave birth to her husband's baby. If someone had told her a week ago this would be her reality, she would have laughed. Terrence had returned from his coffee run and nearly dropped his cup when he saw Nadia in the delivery room. Their eyes met across Camille's hospital bed, and she saw guilt and panic flash across his face. He knew that she knew. The careful mask he'd been wearing for months was finally slipping. "Nadia," he started to say, but another contraction cut him off as Camille squeezed both their hands. "I can see the head," Dr. Martinez announced from her position at the foot of the bed. "One more big push, Camille." With Nadia holding one hand and Terrence holding the other, Camille gave one final push, and suddenly the room was filled with the strong, healthy cry of a newborn baby. "It's a girl?" Dr. Martinez said, holding up a beautiful brown-skinned baby with a full head of dark hair. Born at 2:47 p.m., weighing 7 pounds 3 ounces. Despite everything, Nadia felt tears spring to her eyes at the sight of her niece. The baby was absolutely perfect, with tiny fingers and toes, and lungs that were clearly working just fine. When Dr. Martinez placed the baby on Camille's chest, both sisters began crying. "She's beautiful," Nadia whispered and meant it completely. "Look at all that hair," Camille said through her tears. "She looks just like you did when you were born, Nadia. Mama always said you had the most hair she'd ever seen on a newborn." For a moment, the tension in the room dissolved as they all marveled at the miracle of new life. Even Terrence seemed genuinely moved, though Nadia noticed he kept glancing nervously between her and the door. "What are you going to name her?" Nadia asked. "Hope," Camille said softly. "I want to name her Hope Davis." She looked directly at Terrence when she said it, and Nadia caught the significance immediately. Davis was Camille's last name, not Thompson. This baby would not carry Terrence's name. "That's beautiful," Nadia said, though she wondered about the choice. Was Camille trying to distance herself from Terrence? Or was she trying to protect Nadia somehow? The next hour was filled with medical procedures, family visits, and the exhausting aftermath of labor. Ruth cooed over her new granddaughter while grandmother Essie held the baby with tears in her eyes. "Another blessing to carry on our family name," grandmother Essie said, and Nadia noticed she looked directly at her when she said it. Terrence had grown increasingly uncomfortable as more family arrived. When Pastor Williams from their church showed up with flowers, Terrence practically bolted from the room. "I need some air," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Nadia followed him out into the hallway, her heart pounding. It was time for the conversation she'd been dreading. "We need to talk," she said firmly. "Nadia, I can explain," he started. "Can you?" she interrupted. "Can you explain why I heard you on the phone yesterday planning your new life in Birmingham with my sister and your daughter?" The color drained from Terrence's face. "You heard that?" "I heard everything," Nadia said, surprised by how calm her voice sounded. "I heard you tell her you loved her. I heard you talk about the nursery on Pine Street. I heard you say I would get over it eventually." Terrence slumped against the hospital wall like a deflated balloon. For a moment, Nadia almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "How long?" she asked. 6 months, he said quietly. "It wasn't supposed to happen, Nadia. We never meant for it to go this far. But it did go this far. She's having your baby, Terrence." "Your baby." Nadia's voice was getting louder, and she had to take a breath to control herself. "Were you ever going to tell me? Or were you just going to disappear one day and leave me wondering?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "I was scared. I didn't know how to tell you without destroying everything." "Everything's already destroyed," Nadia said. "The question now is what we do about it." They stood in the hospital hallway in silence for a moment, the weight of 5 years of marriage hanging between them. Nadia thought about all the times she dreamed of this moment, telling her husband she was pregnant, planning for their future together, becoming parents. None of those dreams had included this scenario. "There's something else," she said finally. "Something you need to know." Terrence looked at her with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "I'm pregnant," she said simply. If she'd slapped him, he couldn't have looked more shocked. His mouth opened and closed several times before he could form words. "You're, what?" "Pregnant. About 6 weeks along. I found out yesterday, right before I heard your phone conversation." Terrence leaned heavily against the wall. "Oh God, Nadia. What have I done?" "That's what we need to figure out," she said. "Because now there are going to be 2 babies involved in this mess, and they're both innocent in all of this." Before Terrence could respond, Camille's room door opened and Ruth stuck her head out. "Nadia, honey, Camille's asking for you," she said. "She seems upset about something." Nadia looked at Terrence one more time. "We'll finish this conversation later. Right now, I need to go take care of my sister." She walked back into the room to find Camille crying, despite the fact that baby Hope was sleeping peacefully in her arms. "What's wrong, sweetie?" Ruth asked, smoothing Camille's hair. "I need to talk to Nadia," Camille said. "Alone." Ruth and grandmother Essie exchanged glances but gathered their things and stepped outside. Once they were alone, Camille looked up at Nadia with red-rimmed eyes. "I know you know," she said quietly. "Know what?" Nadia asked, though they both knew exactly what she meant. "About Terrence. About us. About everything." Camille's voice was barely above a whisper. "I saw the way you looked at him earlier. I saw the way he's been acting all day. You found out, didn't you?" Nadia sat down in the chair next to the bed, her legs suddenly feeling weak. "Yesterday." "I'm so sorry," Camille said, fresh tears streaming down her face. "I never meant for this to happen, Nadia. I never meant to hurt you." "But you did hurt me," Nadia said, her own tears starting again. "You both did. Do you have any idea what it's like to find out your husband and your sister have been lying to you for months? To know that everyone I trusted most in this world was keeping secrets from me? I wanted to tell you so many times," Camille said. "But I was scared. I was ashamed. And then when I found out I was pregnant." She looked down at baby Hope. "I didn't know what to do." "So you decided to do nothing?" Nadia asked. "You decided to let me find out by accident while you and my husband planned your future together?" "We're not planning a future together," Camille said quickly. "At least I'm not." "Nadia, there's something else you need to know." Nadia's heart sank. How much more could there be? "Terrence wanted me to move to Birmingham with him," Camille continued. "He said he was going to leave you after the baby was born. But I told him no. I can't do that to you, Nadia. I won't do that to you." This was not what Nadia had expected to hear. "What do you mean?" "I mean I made a mistake. A huge, terrible mistake. But I'm not going to compound it by running away with your husband." Camille shifted baby Hope to her other arm. "I love you too much for that. I've loved you longer than I've known Terrence, and I won't choose him over you." Nadia stared at her sister, trying to process this new information. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm done with him. I'm saying I want to focus on my daughter and figure out how to be a good mother. And I'm saying I hope someday you can forgive me, because I can't imagine my life without my big sister in it." The room fell silent except for the soft sounds of baby Hope sleeping. Nadia looked at her sister, really looked at her, and saw not the confident young woman she'd become, but the scared little girl who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms. "Camille," she said finally, "I need you to understand something. What you and Terrence did, it broke something in me. It's going to take a long time for me to trust either of you again." "I understand," Camille said quickly. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I just need you to know that I'm sorry, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making it up to you." "There's something else," Nadia said, taking a deep breath. "Something you need to know." "What?" "I'm pregnant too." The silence in the hospital room was deafening. Camille's eyes went wide as she processed what Nadia had just told her. "You're pregnant?" she whispered. 6 weeks, Nadia confirmed. "I found out the same day I discovered about you and Terrence." Camille closed her eyes, fresh tears leaking from the corners. "Oh Nadia. What have we done to you?" "That's what I've been trying to figure out," Nadia said. She looked down at baby Hope, who was stirring slightly in her sleep. "Our children are going to be half-siblings. They're going to share a father who has already shown he can't be trusted. What are you going to do?" It was the question that had been haunting Nadia for 24 hours. What was she going to do? How could she stay married to Terrence after this betrayal? How could she raise a child with a man who had cheated with her own sister? But how could she become a single mother when she'd always dreamed of having a traditional family? "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But I know one thing for sure. I'm going to have this baby, and I'm going to love it with everything I have, regardless of what happens between me and Terrence." "Does he know about your pregnancy?" "I told him a few minutes ago in the hallway. I think he's in shock." Camille shifted uncomfortably in the hospital bed. "Nadia, there's something else I need to tell you. About Terrence and me." Nadia's stomach clenched. How much more could there be? "It wasn't just physical between us," Camille said quietly. "I mean, it was at first. We were both feeling lonely and neglected, and one thing led to another. But then, I thought I was falling in love with him." The words hit Nadia like a physical blow. She'd assumed this was just an affair, just sex, just a terrible mistake. But love? That made it so much worse. "But you said you were done with him," Nadia said, her voice shaking. "I am. Because I realized something when I was in labor today when you were holding my hand." Camille looked directly at her sister. "I realized that what I was feeling for Terrence wasn't real love. It was guilt and fear and desperation all mixed up together. Real love doesn't make you lie to the people you care about most. Real love doesn't make you betray your own sister. So what was it then? I was scared about being a single mother. I was scared about disappointing mama and grandmama. I was scared about being alone. Camille's voice grew stronger as she spoke. And Terrence was there, being kind to me, making me feel special. It was wrong, but it felt like he was offering me a way out of being scared. Nadia understood that feeling more than she cared to admit. Fear had driven so many of her own decisions over the years. But today, when you came here and held my hand while I gave birth to his baby, Camille continued, I realized what real love looks like. It looks like showing up even when you're hurting. It looks like putting family first even when family has hurt you. It looks like you, Nadia. The tears came again for both of them. Baby Hope began to fuss, perhaps sensing the emotional tension in the room. Can I hold her? Nadia asked suddenly. Camille nodded and carefully transferred the tiny bundle into Nadia's arms. The moment Baby Hope settled against her chest, Nadia felt something shift inside her. This beautiful little girl was innocent of all the adult drama surrounding her birth. She deserved to be loved and protected, regardless of the circumstances of her conception. Hello, little Hope, Nadia whispered, stroking the baby's soft cheek. I'm your Aunt Nadia. More than an aunt, Camille said softly. You're going to be the best role model she could ever have. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, Nadia holding her niece while Camille recovered from childbirth. Despite everything that had happened, there was something peaceful about this moment, something that felt like the beginning of healing rather than the end of everything. What happens now? Camille asked eventually. I don't know about the big picture, Nadia said honestly. But I know what happens right now. You're going to recover from having this baby. I'm going to take care of my pregnancy and figure out what I want my future to look like. And we're both going to focus on these children and making sure they have the love and stability they deserve. And Terrence? Terrence is going to have to figure out what kind of father he wants to be to 2 daughters, Nadia said firmly. Because whether we stay married or get divorced, he's going to be responsible for both of these babies. A knock on the door interrupted them. It was Ruth, peeking in cautiously. Can we come back in? Terrence is asking to speak with both of you girls. Nadia and Camille exchanged glances. They weren't ready for a big family confrontation, but they couldn't avoid it forever. Send him in, Nadia said. But just him for now. Terrence entered the room looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past few hours. His usually confident demeanor was completely gone, replaced by the posture of a man who knew he'd lost everything that mattered. I need to say something to both of you, he began, his voice hoarse. I need to apologize and I need to tell you what I'm going to do to try to make this right. There's no making this right, Nadia said coldly. But we're listening. I was wrong. I was selfish and cowardly and I hurt the 2 people who trusted me most. He looked from Nadia to Camille and back again. I don't have an excuse for what I did. I can't blame loneliness or work stress or anything else. I made a choice to betray both of you, and I have to live with that for the rest of my life. What do you want from us, Terrence? Camille asked. I want to be a good father to both of my daughters, he said. I want to support both of you in whatever way you'll let me. And I want to spend the rest of my life making up for what I've done. And what about Birmingham? Nadia asked. What about your plan to start over somewhere new? There is no Birmingham. There is no starting over. There is only here now with the consequences of my actions. Terrence sat down heavily in the chair by the window. I don't expect either of you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to trust me again. But I'm going to do everything I can to be the man these babies deserve to have as their father. Nadia looked at her husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, probably, and felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and something that might have been pity. He'd destroyed his marriage, broken up his family, and hurt everyone he claimed to love. The consequences of his choices would ripple through all their lives for years to come. But as she looked down at baby Hope in her arms and thought about the child growing inside her own body, Nadia realized that those consequences didn't have to be entirely negative. These children could grow up knowing they were loved, even if their family structure was complicated. They could grow up seeing strength and resilience in their mothers, even if their father had failed them. Here's what's going to happen, Nadia said, her voice strong and clear. I'm going to file for divorce. I'm going to keep the house and raise my baby there. You're going to pay child support for both children, and you're going to be present in their lives in whatever way Camille and I decide is best for them. Nadia, Terrence started. I'm not finished, she interrupted. You're also going to start going to counseling because these children deserve a father who has dealt with whatever issues made him think this was acceptable behavior. And you're going to respect our decisions about what's best for our family, even if that means you don't get everything you want. Terrence nodded slowly. Whatever you think is best. What I think is best, Nadia continued, is for these little girls to grow up knowing they're loved by their mothers, their grandmother, their great-grandmother, and their entire extended family. I think what's best is for them to see that women can be strong and independent and that they don't have to settle for less than they deserve. She looked at Camille, who was watching her with something that looked like admiration. And I think what's best is for their aunt and their mother to show them what real sisterhood looks like, even when it's hard, even when it's complicated, even when people make mistakes. Does that mean you forgive me? Camille asked hopefully. It means I'm going to try, Nadia said honestly. It means I love you more than I hate what you did. And it means these babies are going to grow up knowing that family is about more than blood. It's about showing up, even when it's hard. As if she understood the conversation happening around her, Baby Hope opened her dark eyes and looked directly at Nadia. In that moment, Nadia felt a peace she hadn't expected to find. This wasn't the future she'd planned, but maybe it was the future she needed. Maybe, sometimes when everything falls apart, it creates space for something better to grow in its place. The early October sun streamed through the windows of Nadia's kitchen as she sat at the table, feeding 6-month-old Faith her morning bottle. Faith was a happy baby with chubby cheeks and curious eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. She looked remarkably similar to Baby Hope, though Faith had inherited Nadia's dimples. "Good morning, beautiful girl," Nadia cooed, smiling as Faith grabbed at the bottle with her tiny hands. "Are you ready for a big day? Aunt Camille and Cousin Hope are coming over." It had taken 6 months, but they'd finally established a routine that worked for everyone. Camille had moved into a small apartment just 10 minutes away, and she and Nadia saw each other several times a week. It wasn't the same as it used to be. There was still hurt there, still moments of awkwardness, but they were building something new together. The doorbell rang and Nadia could hear Camille's voice calling out, "It's us." "Come on in," Nadia called back. "We're in the kitchen." Camille entered carrying Baby Hope, who was now 6 months old and full of personality. Hope immediately started babbling excitedly when she saw Faith, as if she knew this was her special playmate. "Look how big Faith is getting," Camille said, settling Hope into her high chair. "She's going to be crawling soon." "Hope's already trying to pull herself up," Nadia observed. "These girls are going to keep us on our toes." It still amazed Nadia how natural it felt having both babies together. They looked like sisters, acted like sisters, and brought out the best in each other. Watching them interact, no one would ever guess the complicated circumstances of their births. "Mama called this morning," Camille said, getting Hope's breakfast ready. "She wants to know if we're all coming to Sunday dinner this week." "Of course we are," Nadia said. "It's become Faith's favorite day of the week. She loves all the attention from Grandmama." Ruth had struggled at first with understanding why Nadia had divorced Terrence and why the sisters had fought. But when she saw how happy and healthy both babies were and how well Nadia and Camille were co-parenting, she'd started to understand that sometimes families don't look the way you expect them to, and that's okay. "Speaking of Sunday dinner," Camille said carefully, "Terrence asked if he could come this week. He's been doing really well in counseling, and Dr. Peterson thinks it might be good for him to see the girls in a family setting." Nadia considered this. Terrence had been remarkably consistent over the past 6 months. He paid child support without being asked, showed up for his scheduled visits with the girls, and had been attending individual therapy twice a week. He was trying, genuinely trying, to become the father these children deserved. "What do you think?" she asked Camille. "I think it might be okay," Camille said. "The girls should know their father, and Grandmama's house is a safe space for all of us." Nadia nodded. "Okay. But if it gets weird or uncomfortable, he leaves. These Sunday dinners are sacred space for our family." Agreed. They spent the morning playing with the babies, taking them for a walk in their double stroller, and running errands together. It was a peaceful, ordinary day, the kind Nadia had learned to treasure. 6 months ago, she couldn't have imagined that her life would look like this: single motherhood, co-parenting with her sister, finding joy in the simple rhythms of caring for her daughter. But here she was, and she was happier than she'd been in years. That afternoon, while the babies napped, Nadia and Camille sat on the back porch with sweet tea and talked about everything and nothing. These conversations had become precious to both of them, a way to rebuild their relationship one honest moment at a time. "I got a promotion at the store," Camille said proudly. "Assistant manager. It comes with better insurance and more regular hours." "That's wonderful," Nadia said, and meant it. Camille had worked hard to create stability for herself and Hope. "You've really gotten your life together." "I had to. For Hope, but also for me." I realized I can't depend on other people to make me feel secure. I have to do that for myself. It was a lesson they'd both learned over the past 6 months. Nadia had thrown herself into her teaching job and her role as a single mother, discovering strengths she hadn't known she possessed. She'd learned to fix leaky faucets, change oil in her car, and manage her finances independently. More importantly, she'd learned to trust her own judgment again. I've been thinking about something, Nadia said. About maybe going back to school. Really? For what? Educational administration. Maybe eventually becoming a principal. Nadia smiled, feeling excited about the possibility. I want to show Faith that it's never too late to chase your dreams, even when life takes unexpected turns. I think that's amazing, Camille said. And I think Faith is lucky to have a mother who never stops growing. As they sat in comfortable silence, watching the leaves begin to change colors, Nadia reflected on how much had transformed in such a short time. 6 months ago, she'd felt like her world was ending. The betrayal had been devastating, the pain almost unbearable. But from that pain had come unexpected gifts. She'd discovered her own strength. She'd learned that love didn't have to look like what she'd expected. She'd found that family could be rebuilt, even after it seemed completely broken. Nadia, Camille said quietly, I need to say something I've been thinking about for months. What's that? Thank you. For what? For not giving up on us. For not writing me off as a terrible person. For letting Hope have a relationship with you. Camille's voice was thick with emotion. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but the fact that you're trying means everything to me. Nadia reached over and squeezed her sister's hand. We both made mistakes, Camille. Yours were bigger and more public than mine, but I wasn't perfect either. I let my marriage coast for years without addressing problems. I took you for granted sometimes. We both had to learn and grow. Still, what you've done for Hope, for me, it's more grace than I ever expected. Hope is family, Nadia said simply. And so are you. That doesn't change just because we went through a rough patch. A cry from inside the house told them the babies were waking up from their naps. As they went inside to get Faith and Hope, Nadia felt overwhelmed with gratitude for this life she'd built from the ashes of her broken dreams. 2 hours later, they were at Grandmother Essie's house for Sunday dinner, the kitchen filled with the sounds of family. Ruth was mashing potatoes while Grandmother Essie supervised from her chair at the table, offering instructions and commentary. The babies sat in their high chairs, creating delightful chaos as they tried to feed themselves. When Terrence arrived, there was a moment of tension, but it quickly dissipated as he focused on the girls. He'd learned to interact with Nadia and Camille with respect and appropriate distance, understanding that his role now was as a co-parent, not as a husband or romantic partner. Faith is getting so big, he said, tickling her feet and making her giggle. And Hope looks just like her mama at this age. They both do, Ruth said proudly. Strong Davis women, these two. After dinner, as the family sat on Grandmother Essie's front porch watching the girls play on a blanket in the yard, Nadia felt a deep sense of contentment. This wasn't the family she'd planned, but it was the family she had, and it was good. You know what I think? Grandmother Essie said, settling back in her rocking chair. I think sometimes God has to break things apart so he can put them back together the way they're supposed to be. What do you mean, Grandmama? Camille asked. I mean, look at these babies. Look at how happy they are together. Look at how you two girls have learned to lean on each other instead of depending on a man to define your worth. Look at how this whole family has grown stronger. Nadia looked around at her family, imperfect, complicated, but filled with love, and realized Grandmother Essie was right. What had seemed like the end of her story had actually been a new beginning. Faith and Hope, she said, watching the two babies reach for each other across the blanket. Perfect names for a new chapter. Perfect names for two little girls who are going to change the world, Camille agreed. As the sun set over Atlanta, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Nadia held her daughter close and knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Faith and Hope, two babies born from broken circumstances but destined for beautiful futures. And sometimes that's exactly how God works. He takes the broken pieces of our lives and creates something more beautiful than we ever could have imagined on our own. The two sisters sat side by side, their daughters in their arms, their family gathered around them, and knew that they were exactly where they were meant to be.